Here is where I have pretty much every single variation of the Hemlock that I do want to use, depending on what kind of map we're on, what game mode, etc. So we have here a balanced class setup, aka an accuracy class setup. Then we have the CQB, our close quarters build, aka the aggressive build. This is going to be used primarily for those smaller maps. You know, think about Shoot House, Shipment, and then we have stealth. I like the stealth personally because this can be used with a multitude of maps, especially the flanking type of play style. Stick to the outskirts and attack the enemy from behind. That's why I really truly love this stealth class setup. So let's go over the balanced class setup first here. Now keep in mind, everything else here is all personal preference. You can use whatever you want to. We're going to be using the Komodo heavy muzzle. Now the reason why is because the horizontal recoil control is pretty noticeable on the ISO Hemlock. When you go into a private match, you just fire at a wall. Don't try to control the aim or anything like that. And you'll notice that it goes up and then it curves slightly to the right. So it's got that horizontal dominant recoil pattern. So if we take a look at the Komodo heavy here, it gives us horizontal recoil control. This is exactly what we want. And the only cons here are aim down sight speed and aiming stability. Now when it comes to the tuning, I went with 0.62 towards aim down sight speed and 0.25 towards aiming idle stability. And then for the barrel, I went with the Fielder T50 barrel, albeit the range bonus that we get from the damage profile right here is that it's really not too noticeable unless it's at longer ranges. As of my own hand testing, I went up to 30 meters because that's the base damage range drop off for this gun at 3 shots at 30 meters. And then when I tested it out again, the damage range was only increased to about 31 meters. Now for tuning, this is a little wonky here when you take a look at that graph. I'm using 0.24 towards that aim walking speed and 0.27 towards that aim down sight speed. So this is about as close as I could get it to balance as possible when trying to balance out the graph here in the middle. It is a little ugly looking here, but that's pretty much the cards that were dealt with this specific attachment. All right, moving on to the laser. We got the FSS-OLV laser. This gives us aim down sight speed, aiming stability, and sprint to fire speed. This actually makes a big difference as far as adding to our ADS. This is definitely useful because you get essentially a free handling attribute just for using a laser. So that's pretty amazing. The only thing you got to worry about is the laser being visible in ADS, but the only way to really counteract that negative is just don't ADS in long lines of sight for too long. That's pretty much it. Just be smart about it. Now for tuning, this is something new to season 2, which is pretty cool. So I went with 0.4 towards that sprint to fire speed and 41.13 towards that handling on the FSS-OLV laser. All right, next up we have the stock. We got the Arcom S4 stock. This gives us a multitude of things here for our mobility as well as handling. I feel like it's a perfect complement to balance out this class setup, especially our goal is to have pretty good accuracy, and this balances out that mobility and handling aspect of things. Now for tuning, I went with 3.23 towards aim walking steadiness and 1.86 towards aiming idle stability. All right, last but not least, we have the X10 grip for sprint to fire speed and aim down sight speed. As for tuning, I went with 0.39 towards recoil steadiness and 0.17 towards that sprint to fire speed. All right, now moving on to our close quarter build here for the ISO Hemlock. And like I was saying, this is exclusively meant to be used for smaller maps. Okay, we're going to be rushing aggressively, and remember, each class setup has its own designated type of playstyle that you should be using this build. Don't be using this on really huge maps and you know, complaining that the recoil is too much, etc., because then you're using it wrong. You know, that's the beauty of Modern Warfare 2. You can build these class setups to your liking, whatever you want to. Let's start off with the underbarrel. We got the VX Pineapple here. This is going to give us a lot of good hip accuracy as well as recoil control, recoil steadiness, and aim walking steadiness. Now for my tuning, I went with 0.62 for hip walking speed and 0.27 towards that aim down sight speed. Then for the muzzle, things don't go changed here. This is still going to be the Komodo heavy based on that recoil pattern testing for that horizontal recoil control. And for tuning, I went with 0.44 ounces towards that aim down sight speed and 0.28 towards aiming idle stability. As for the barrel, I went with the RCQ7 barrel for aim down sight speed, hip recoil control, and movement speed. This is the main reason why this build is just best up close and personal, because of these cons here: damage range, hip fire accuracy, bullet velocity, recoil control, all this kind of stuff. Really irrelevant, doesn't matter, because we're using this up close and personal anyway. So when you're going into matches, go in with the mindset that, hey, this is a small map, I'm going to be using the CQB build because of these attributes right here. We're going to have weaknesses at longer range, so this tells us we have to keep keep our engagements up close and personal. All right, now moving on to the laser. I'm actually using the 𝗧𝗘𝗔𝗠 laser here because this gives us more hip recoil control as well as hip fire accuracy and sprint to fire speed. These are all very important attributes in very close quarters combat. So, I mean, you could go with the FSS-OV laser if you want to. There's nothing wrong with that. However, I just feel like having more attributes that's going to help us out in close quarter combat situation is going to be more suitable for this build. All right, and for the tuning on the 𝗧𝗘𝗔𝗠 laser, I went with 0.42 towards hip walking speed and 42.77 towards that sprint to fire speed. All right, and last but not least, we have the ISO stockless mod. This is going to be the game changer of what actually really makes this build a very close aggressive build. Aim down sight speed, sprint to fire speed, movement speed, and hip recoil control. All right, next up, we have my personal favorite, the stealth ISO Hemlock class setup. Now let's start off with the barrel here. We have this 𝗧𝗧𝗏121 barrel. This gives us sound suppression and recoil control. This is a pretty nice combination right here. And yes, the recoil control actually does make a difference in controlling the recoil. Now, the only con here is the damage range, and you will see later on in the video when I talk about the stats that there actually is a pretty significant reduction to our damage range. When you're flanking and you're playing stealthy, you're meant to be up close and personal regardless when you are flanking opponents. You got to be sneaky, right? You can't be sneaky from like 50 meters away. So this damage range reduction isn't really going to matter too much. Now for the underbarrel, again, we're using the VX Pineapple, and for my tuning I went with 0.59 towards that hip walking speed and 0.35 towards that aim down sight speed. And now for the laser, I am using the 𝗧𝗘𝗔𝗠 laser once again, and for my tuning I went with 0.42 towards hip walking speed and 41.13 towards that sprint to fire speed. All right, and the stock, another reason why this gun is amazing, because of this stock right here, the ISO stockless mod. Again, you actually cannot tune this attachment, so just a heads up. All right, now for the rear grip, I'm actually using the Support C90 grip for aiming stability and flinch resistance. I feel like in order to balance out this weapon just a tiny bit, we're going to need to have some type of accuracy just in case we get into engagements that are too far out of our reach. We want to be as accurate as possible. That's why we're using this attachment. Now for my tuning, I went with 0.48 towards aim down sight speed and 0.22 towards that sprint to fire speed. All right, so now that you've seen all three of my builds for the ISO Hemlock, let's go ahead and take a look at the stats. First test that we're going to do here is we're going to compare the base weapon to our balanced, aka accurate class setup, and we're going to do the same thing for the aggro as well as the stealth class setup, you know, just to see, you know, do these class setups actually reduce our movement speed or do they make us faster? And we're just going to go ahead and use our arrow keys here, and let's see who gets there first. All right, we're getting a little closer. All right, so we have about 9.8 seconds here between both. So if you're using an accurate class setup, you can expect that there is going to be no reduction to your movement speed or increases to your movement speed. All right, next up we have the base versus our aggressive class setup here on the right-hand side. So, you know, I would say it's common sense by now. If you're going to build your class setup just based on aggression, then you've got to be a little bit faster, right? So let's take a look here. All right, so obviously we have a clear winner with the aggressive class setup. This is actually not surprising. Obviously, this is just for educational purposes only. As you see here on the left-hand side, our base weapon has not even reached the wall yet, but our aggressive class setup has. This is also at 9.5 seconds. Now, the base had a time of 9.8. So 9.8 ballpark, obviously not super accurate to the millisecond here, but it's just super obvious which gun actually reaches the wall first. All right, next up we have the base weapon versus our stealth class setup here. So let's go ahead and start this thing off. All right, now with the stealth class setup, you have to keep in mind it also does have that collapse stock, same as the aggressive class setup. And let's see here. Obviously, we have a clear winner with the stealth class setup reaching that wall first before our base weapon does. So it's actually pretty interesting here that we have 9.483 seconds. Obviously, like I said, this is just hand testing, and this may not be super accurate, but visually, it seems that the stealth is a lot faster than the base weapon here. So all in all, the accurate class setup has the same movement speed as our base movement speed, and then the aggressive and stealth you can expect to move a little bit faster. All right, so now I want to go ahead and show you guys the recoil comparisons between the base and our 3 builds here for the ISO Hemlock. So here's the base setup. This is what I was referring to as far as its horizontal recoil control. It starts from here and then it goes up and then it shoots off to the right, so forming like a C pattern almost. And then here on the accuracy setup, you can clearly spot this out just by looking at it straight up. The accuracy setup does have a much cleaner recoil pattern, tighter bullet spread, and also a reduction in our horizontal recoil control. This is due in part thanks to the barrel that we're using as well as the muzzle. And here for the aggro is not too bad. I mean, it's not the best, but this is to be expected, especially when we're building this to be used for up close and personal engagements only. So seeing this recoil pattern shouldn't be alarming because you're supposed to use it up close anyway, and at close ranges you just have a higher percentage accuracy regardless because your target is naturally going to be bigger. Now interestingly enough, with the stealth class setup, the recoil pattern doesn't really look that great when you compare it to the previous 2 here, but definitely there is some improvement versus the base. Now there is still some horizontal recoil control here, and this is mainly because of that 𝗧𝗧 barrel that we're using. It doesn't allow us to add the Komodo heavy for that horizontal recoil control reduction, which is why we see that here. But regardless, when it translates into a real life situation, it's still manageable. All right, and here's our final test. This is going to be a fun one. So we're going to look at the aim down sight speed. So here we have our base aim down sight speed. When we aim down sight, we're going to look for the zoom in effect in the background. So that's when the timer should start. Right there, see that little movement? As soon as we see that movement, that's when that timer should start ticking. And then we're gonna keep going, and then as soon as this stops, see, even if I were to go a little bit further, it still is not moving. So that means that this is about our limit as far as the zoom in goes. And once everything stops moving and stops zooming in, this is where we stop our timer at 217 milliseconds. This is all hand tested, so obviously I might not get the same exact results as some other people do, but this is as close as we can get it if you're hand testing it. All right, so now let's take a look at our accurate build. So we're gonna run the same exact protocol here, and we're gonna just stop until the background stops zooming in. As you see, when I get past this 283, the background stops. So this is where it starts moving again. So right here, 283 is going to be the limit, and 283 is our ADS for this accurate recoil build. So clearly a lot slower than the base ADS, but this is to be expected. When you're putting on all these attachments, you are going to get a reduction in your ADS, but nonetheless, this build is supposed to be used at longer ranges regardless because it's an accurate class setup. It's not meant for close range engagements. Here's our aggressive class setup here for our aim down sight speed test. Let's go ahead and start this up here. All right, so the farther I go, the background has stopped, so we're gonna back it up here a little bit. All right, 217, 233, and the farther I go, background stops moving. So 233 millisecond ADS. This is as close as we can get to the base stats here for the ADS. So this is pretty good for the aggressive class setup. All right, last but not least, we have our stealth class setup here, and we're just gonna go through the same exact protocols. So we're gonna wait until that background stops moving. Oh, I think we went a little too far. Let's back up. All right, and the zoom, just to make sure. Yeah, stops at 233. So interestingly enough, the stealth class setup has the same ADS speed as our aggressive class setup. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, so to wrap everything up here, as far as our 3 builds, our ADS for stealth is at 233, ADS for aggro is at 233, and the base is at 217. While we had the slowest ADS on our balanced accurate class setup, like I said, it's expected, but this is the best and most optimal that we can get it. But this is pretty interesting. I like this 233 and 233 as well, as close to stock as possible. Now, one interesting thing that I noticed about the stealth class setup is that it actually takes 3 shots to kill at 21 meters. So if you take a look at the base with no attachments, it's 3 shots at 30 meters. So obviously there is a significant damage range reduction there. This tells you a story of how this gun is going to be effective at certain ranges and how you should be using this weapon. I mean, the reason why there's a built-in suppressor to that barrel in the first place is because you're meant to be playing sneaky up close regardless. Now, as far as the movement goes, there is faster movement versus the base. And then moving on to the aggro, again, we're going to highlight this 233 ADS, which is nice. We need that for aggressive play. And then also bullets to kill is still going to be the same, 3 shots at 30 meters. And then we still get faster movement versus the base. Now, for the balanced, we talked about this, the slower ADS. Now, the 3-shot kill got increased to 31 meters. So there's a bit of an increase there to our damage range, but albeit it's not by much when you compare it to the base at 30 meters. And then for the movement, it is unchanged, so you don't have to worry about being noticeably slower. So all in all, guys, hopefully you guys did enjoy this video, found it educational, informational. Make sure to leave a like if you want to see more videos like this. Let me know down below in the comments as well. I am driven by your guys' feedback. I appreciate all the support, and I'll see you guys in the next one.